This is a great case, and we're excited about it. And we really believe that your right to self-defense doesn't stop when you cross state lines.
David, I want to start with you, and we're going to get into the lawsuit and everything there. But can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your operation there? I know you're a long haul trucker. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I've been driving on the road for 10 years now, and not just driving, but living in this truck, moving from truck to truck as I advance through the industry. Um, I've probably got 500,000 safe miles under my belt. Been to every state and every major city and pulled every type of trailer except a cattle hauler.
And I think what you're saying there really does kind of factor into this bigger issue that we're talking about here with the lawsuit. Um, you've got a Texas license to carry, if I understand
I have,
correctly.
yes.
For those who may not know out there, what does that mean specifically? Or I guess better yet, what is it supposed to mean in terms of, again, you're moving from state to state? What is that supposed to mean?
Supposed to mean in which state, and that's the exact problem that we're trying to address. Um, to give you an example, in the state of Florida, if I show my gun, I go to jail. In the state of Washington, if I don't show my gun, if I cover it up in any way, I go to jail. Um, in the state of Texas, it's just a license to carry a gun. It doesn't make any difference whether it's concealed or not. In certain other states, it does. It's an absolute spider web of rules and regulations that I've had to learn over the past 10 years and check and recheck every time I cross a state line.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to kind of follow up with you. The issue is not just confusion and not just complications, but we're talking about real legal problems if you get stopped in a state where it isn't recognized. And Lauren, from a legal standpoint, what we're really talking about here, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm obviously not an attorney, but this is a reciprocity issue by and large. Is that right? Or I mean, constitutional as well, but is that kind of where we're standing here?
Yes, so that's the exact issue is the reciprocity. So we have these kind of constitutional underpinnings that we looked at when we thought about bringing this case, besides the Second Amendment. So you have your driver's license, and that's recognized by federal law across state lines. You have your birth certificate, your marriage license that's recognized as valid across state lines. And we have case law that says these are vital pieces of information for your identity, so they must be recognized. The old court cases said we can't have bastard kids in one state because you didn't recognize the marriage license. So we have that kind of these underpinnings, if you will, that go along with the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution. And the full faith and credit clause requires that each state recognize records from the state government and court orders and things like that. So this is similar in the sense that it's a license, from a state. It's lawfully issued, it's valid, it's current, and it should be recognized as such across the country. And the important thing of our lawsuit is the Second Amendment, and the analysis there. So we have our most recent Supreme Court case, the Bruin case from 2022, where the SCOTUS basically said that, hey, a law that infringes on the Second Amendment is going to be invalid unless there is a historical analog. So if historically we were restricting firearms, right to bear arms in that way, then the law today will be valid. So what we have to look at is back in 1791, at the time that the Second Amendment was ratified, were there laws that prevented out-of-state residents from carrying firearms across state lines? Were there laws that you had to, as a visitor, had to get permission from the visiting state prior to, traveling and say, hey, can I carry my can I carry my firearm across state lines? And what I found was that not only was there not a historical analog, that there weren't laws prohibiting out of state residents from carrying firearms into other states, that instead there was actually laws on the books that required visitors, travelers to carry firearms. So that was very interesting to me.
Um, there are, I kind of look at this as being there's two, I guess, buckets we can put this in. We're talking, obviously, Lauren, you're talking about the legal aspect of this. David, you're, dealing with this on a daily, weekly basis on a practical level, as you kind of explained there. Can you take me back to, I guess, the origin of the lawsuit here? I'm sure you didn't wake up on a random, Tuesday or Wednesday and think to yourself, you know what, I'd like to file a lawsuit against the state of Minnesota, because I'm having, these headaches that are kind of popping up. How did the issue kind of, I guess, first pop up for you? Was there a certain situation that happened, or how did we get to this point, I suppose, in this story here?
It was a Thursday that I woke up, not a Tuesday.
Not
That's
a
the
random
only
Tuesday or
incorrect.
Wednesday. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it was a Thursday.
There you go.
No, that's it. That's exactly how it happened. I love freedom a whole lot, and so I got to thinking this can't be constitutional, but I had to go and study the Constitution. I'm ashamed to say, to find out what was wrong with it, and that's when I came across full faith and credit, like she was talking about. And then I started calling around law firms and said, who will take my case? Because I can't really afford to go before the Supreme Court or any court at all.
Yeah, and so you made that phone call, and obviously the
Mm-hmm.
conversation continued. And
Mm-hmm.
did it become pretty apparent to you early on that there is something here, to pursue?
Once I understood the full faith and credit clause, yes, it became pretty apparent, in especially like she said, in light of the Bruin case. And speaking of which, I just want to say how much I appreciate Liberty Justice Center because I couldn't do any of this without them and their backing.
Yeah. Lauren, can you talk about that? I mean, maybe it was a random Friday, I don't know, or maybe it was a random Thursday as well. But um, you know, this case or this complaint came across your desk. I'm assuming at some point, obviously, because you're talking to us here. Was it pretty apparent to you pretty early on that there was something here that just wasn't right, that was worth pursuing?
Yeah, so I don't recall the day of the week that David gave me a call. But I had some Nebraska, or still have some Nebraska cases where we were challenging state preemption that dealt with firearm laws. So that's how David found our law firm and me, and specifically because I had brought these Nebraska cases. So he literally called me up and said, I have a case that I think you should take. And I think it's a Second Amendment, maybe privileges and immunities. I'm not sure. Can you take a look at it? And so I started taking a look at it, and I'm not in necessarily the Second Amendment field. And so I just started researching it and looking at it and realizing that there is something here. What is it? I'm not sure. It took me a little bit to look at the different constitutional arguments, because we did look at full faith and credit. We looked at privileges and immunities, the right to travel, because it seems to kind of affect all of those. We have these privileges and immunities where the court, old case law says, hey, you as American citizens have the right to travel from state to state. That's why we have the ability to freely move between the states, to be treated as a welcome visitor and not a hostile alien, legal term. So we have those rights. And so when I started looking at it more closely, I realized that this was something that we should be looking into. So we took a little bit of time to kind of think through, where would we bring this type of a claim? Because his Texas license is recognized by some states. There are some states that right now do give reciprocity, but there's still a number of states that not only don't recognize the out of state permit, but some of them, there's no avenue forward, such as California and New York, to allow a non-resident to get a firearm permit. So in looking strategically, we did choose Minnesota because of its restrictions.
And they're pretty strict, right? in
They
Minnesota?
are pretty strict. Yeah. And it is pretty onerous, so if you look at the complaint, we talked through kind of the process that you'd have to get a firearm permit. So first you've got this arbitrary process that the commissioner goes through to determine which states they're going to recognize and which states they're not. And they do it annually. So each year it changes. And you can look at their list, and sometimes it'll say, oh, this particular state they'll recognize, but only the enhanced permit, and then the next year it'll say, well, not the enhanced permit, none of the permits, so it just changes arbitrarily. And there's nothing in the statute that says what the criteria is for determining other than similar to Minnesota. But when I started looking, a lot of the permit requirements across the country are very similar. There's age requirements, there's background checks. You can't be a felon. You can't be, part or prohibited from carrying a firearm from the federal government. So a lot of these similarities are there. So you have this arbitrary list. We started there. Next thing we look at is the permitting process itself. So Minnesota does have a way forward for non-residents to get a firearm permit, but the process for an out-of-state resident, and especially in David's case, is really burdensome. So you physically have to go to Minnesota and apply in person. You cannot apply online. And when you apply in person, you don't get your permit right away. After you submit all your documentation, then you have to wait 30 days. And then the permit doesn't, it's not just an automatic thing, it's physically mailed to your home address. So in David's case, it's going to be mailed to his home state in Texas, and he doesn't go home very often. So he wouldn't get his laminated permit from Minnesota until he has that time. So the time period from, when you actually apply to when you would actually get your permit, in the meantime, he could be traveling through Minnesota because his schedule changes on the daily. As soon as he's done with the delivery, he gets his assignment for his next delivery. So he never knows when he's going through Minnesota.
So I think it's pretty clear why this suit has been filed, right? And David, you spoke about it in terms of just, you know, not just an inconvenience, but the fact that you're not able to travel basically freely from state to state, and that's your job, and obviously that's your livelihood. I don't want to put words in either of your mouths, so I want to ask you just kind of a blanket question here. The end trial here, or at the end of the trial, if you're looking for the end goal, and they may be your answers may be a little bit different. Obviously, you're working toward the same goal, but David, at the end of this, is it just as simple as, hey, I just want to be able to move freely from state to state and exercise my Second Amendment right? I mean, what is your end goal here? What are you hoping to get out of this?
My end goal personally in doing this is to, since I have standing as a truck driver that's more obvious than most other citizens, I am going up against, well, I'm trying to create a circuit split with Minnesota saying yes, and other cases that are currently in progress in New York and California saying no. I guess going back to your earlier question, that was what really got me to thinking when I saw that case in New York filed. I got to thinking, well, why can't that case be filed somewhere else? And then create a circuit split. Oh, here we go. And that's what spun out this whole idea.
So I
Yeah.
think what you're trying to say is that your objective is to get the case to the US Supreme Court so that we can get a decision with the Supreme Court saying that, yes, the Second Amendment right cannot be infringed, across state borders. Is that what you're trying to say?
And that's why you're paid the amount that you are.
Well, technically, we do all our cases pro bono at Liberty Justice, but yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, Lauren, that is, I guess, if you were to take this thing on down the road, this isn't just, a David McCoy issue. This is an issue for any American who wants to exercise that Second Amendment right from state to state. Is that right?
Precisely. So the way that you look at the laws, if you're just a family going on a camping trip and you've got your RV and you're traveling across the country and you're literally living in your RV, as you go across state lines, you may or may not be able to defend yourself and your family based on that state's laws. So it does affect millions of Americans as they travel, not just David, not just the trucking industry. It's a lot of Americans wanting to exercise their Second Amendment right. And really, there's no other rights that you have to ask the other state for permission to exercise. So if you're traveling across the country, you don't have to say, hey, I would like permission to speak my mind freely against the government. You don't have to ask permission for free speech. You don't have to ask for permission to exercise your religion. So this is the one kind of amendment where you have to ask permission before you can exercise it.
I'm not going to ask you to argue the case for the opposition here, but I'm wondering, how strong do you feel your case is? I assume there is a conversation about states' rights and, what Minnesota wants to do and what they want to honor may be different from what Texas wants to do. Um, I guess in the overarching scheme here, how confident do you feel about your argument in this case?
Well, I don't like to say that it's a guarantee. I don't like to say that for any case I've ever taken, because you never know how courts are going to rule. But I do think that based on the precedent that we have before us, that this is a strong case. So it really comes down to the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And the highest court of the land has interpreted the Second Amendment to mean that you cannot infringe on that private individual right to bear arms unless there's a historical analog. And recently, the Eighth Circuit affirmed a decision from the District of Minnesota where they were challenging the same exact statute, chapter that we're challenging right now. They challenged it on a ban of 18 to 20-year-olds to get a firearm permit. We're challenging the reciprocity aspect of that same statute. Recently, Eighth Circuit in 2024 decided that, yes, the District of Minnesota correctly interpreted the historical analysis, that there was no historical analog for prohibiting 18 to 20-year-olds. And the court actually looked at other historical laws at the time, and there were actually laws that required 18 to 20-year-olds, that age range, to carry firearms. And so I think that's why our case is very analogous in the sense of there isn't a historical analog of a law that prohibited out-of-state residents from carrying firearms in visiting states. There wasn't a historical analog for out-of-state residents to get permission to carry their firearm in a visiting state. And instead, there's actually laws on the books that required travelers to carry firearms. So I think that we do have a strong argument for this case. It aligns with the Second Amendment and the analysis that the Supreme Court has put forward. So,
David, you're out there every day, and I know you speak with your fellow truck drivers. I imagine in those conversations, this has probably come up, and I imagine many of them are dealing with the same, types of things that you're dealing with. Have you gotten feedback from other truck drivers, either about your case or about this issue in general, and what are they telling you?
Tremendous feedback. In the states where it is legal, I'll carry my gun openly on my hip, not to intimidate anybody or because I expect to use it, but as a conversation starter. And I've had so many people in truck stops, you have a gun? How can you have a gun? This is America. Welcome to America. And yes, I carry a gun primarily to defend you, ma'am, because when seconds count, police are minutes away.
Yeah.
And I love telling that to them, and just I watch the light come on in their eyes and they realize that gun minus badge does not equal evil person.
Yeah. And I mean, just from a practical standpoint too, what you're going through and going from state to state and having to, as you pointed out there, obviously abide by the laws. You are a law-abiding citizen. You don't want to, pay these penalties and whatever they may be in any particular state. But the same thing, I mean, truck drivers, aside from you, are going through the exact same thing that you are, I imagine, as well. I mean, have you talked with them about the hoops they have to jump through to kind of, make sure that they're doing what they are supposed to do?
Not the truck driving community is the closest thing we have left to outlaws. And I've heard a lot of from a lot of other drivers that have taken a what I think is a pretty dangerous attitude of come and make me, come and take it, I dare you to try, and I don't really agree with that, but that's the general consensus that I've found. It's either that or all guns are evil and you're an evil person for carrying it. Now go away. Um, one story that I did want to tell you just to show how arbitrary and ridiculous this is. Most of your listeners will know where I'm talking about. Climbing up 81 out of Virginia, you pass through West Virginia, then Maryland, and then into Pennsylvania. West Virginia is so free that I was talking to a guy who was working on my truck and just chatting about guns. Oh yeah, I have an AT-4 rocket launcher sitting at home, all completely legal.
All
And
right.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, and then go 12 miles north, and you're in Maryland, one of the most restrictive states in America. And then go 24 more miles north, and you're in Pennsylvania. Not the worst, but not the best either. But just because I traveled those 25 miles through Maryland, I've got to stop in West Virginia, unload my gun, put it away, drive 25 miles, stop in Pennsylvania, reload my gun, put it back on my hip, and off I go again.
Yeah. And you're obviously, aware of that everywhere you go, and you gotta watch that, watch the borders come up and think about what you got to do, which is again where we're at here with this lawsuit. With the suit in particular, it's been filed. What happens next in the short term, and what's the timeline here? And I guess I can ask that to you, Loren.
Yeah, so the timeline, we serve the complaint on the defendants, and then they have a time frame in which to answer. After that, this is a very legal question. There shouldn't be a lot of facts in dispute. And so, it's likely something that'll get resolved without a trial, most likely on a motion for summary judgment, and just putting forth, hey, these are the historical laws. And now the burden is technically on Minnesota to show that there were similar laws at the time, but we've done our research and there weren't any. So I do think that this will get resolved potentially within a matter of months. But courts, we're at the mercy of the courts and their schedule, and so we can't truly determine what time frame we're looking at.
Yeah, I was
But
going
we
to
do
say
hope that this will move quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say months is that's a pretty accelerated rate for the court system as we know, but we'll see what
Yeah.
happens there. I've asked a lot of questions here. Is there anything I forgot to ask either of you that you might want to add here at the end, or anything you want to let our listeners know about?
Well,
I
I
guess,
just think that this, go ahead, David.
oh, sorry. I guess I would say that to anybody who wants to know the ultimate reason why I'm not just bringing this lawsuit, but concerned about guns at all, is I think it was a quote from the Bonhoeffer movie. I'm not 100%, but it said, be a problem for evil. And as I understand it, when in that era of 1940s Germany, this pastor didn't want to fight because he's supposed to be a pastor. He's supposed to be a man of peace. And he came to understand that all it takes for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing. And so it is my goal, after telling people about Jesus, to be a problem and a nuisance for evil. And that's the ultimate reason why I carry a gun, is not to be a problem or a nuisance or hurt any particular person, but to save lives and hinder evil.
Yeah. Loren, final thoughts?
Yeah, and David's a great plaintiff, and we're very grateful for all of our plaintiffs, not just David and our other plaintiff, Jeff Johnson, being willing to stand up against the government takes a lot of courage and bravery. And, it helps that, they're going through Liberty Justice Center because it's done pro bono. We think that everyone should be able to defend the Constitution and their individual rights and liberties, and that cost shouldn't be a burden or a hindrance to doing so. David's a great plaintiff along with Jeff Johnson, in that they're both just good citizens. Their own morals and beliefs are that they should be helpers on the road. They shouldn't be hindrances. They should be there when people are in trouble. And that's one of the great things about David, is not just that he's a law-abiding citizen, that he helps other people, but it's representative of just kind of Americans in general. Most Americans just want the right to defend themselves against evil, and most Americans, I believe, are good. And when left to it, like David, a lot of people like to help other people, and be there in their times of need. So this is a great case, and we're excited about it. And, we really believe that your right to self-defense doesn't stop when you cross state lines. And so that's what we're hoping to, get kind of a decision from the court that says that. And I think that would help not just David and the other plaintiff, but all American citizens.
Well, I'll certainly follow up with both of you as this kind of plays out. And I appreciate both of you speaking with us today. And I have to believe we'll talk again soon.
Sounds
Appreciate
good.
you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hey, thanks for watching. To stay up to date on the latest in trucking news, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to be notified of new videos when they come out each week.